collected during the data recovery excavations, talk a little bit about the archival research that we've done up to now, and then kind of summarize all that information for the audience. So this site was recorded as part of our archaeological investigations for the I-45 project in Houston, called the North Houston Highway Improvement Project. It runs along I-45 from Beltway 8 up on the north to US 59 down on the south, and runs for about 26.4 miles long, and requires about 450 acres of new right-of-way. So lots of archaeology to do there. Over on the right here, you'll see a parcel relevant to our discussion today. It is south of I-10, east of US 59, and in a bend of horseshoe bend of Upper Bayou. This location might. I'm sorry. Sure. Is this better? Okay. This location might look familiar to some of you, since it is right across the highway from Frosttown. So let's get a little bit into the history. So Frosttown was one of the earliest settlements in Houston. The larger area was it was purchased in, or it was granted in 1824 by the Mexican government to John Austin, and then several years later, Jonathan Benson Frost built a home there. He then, the following year, purchased about 15 acres in that horseshoe bend of Buffalo Bayou, where he had settled. The community that sprung up around him adopted his name and was called Frosttown, and it originally consisted of 8 city blocks in downtown Houston. Later in the 1880s, it expanded south to include the Moody Addition, and then in the early 1900s, it expanded east to include Schrimpf's Field. During the mid 1900s, it was eventually destroyed, unfortunately, through a series of development projects. Yes, okay, so over on the left here, we have a map dating to 1868, and then over on the right, 1869. This map over here on the left shows the location of the Frost home, as well as the Schrimpf home over in Frosttown. The map over on the right shows it a little easier to see the 8 city blocks of Frosttown here, designated in block 1. Down here in block 2, we've got the Moody Addition, and then over here in block 3 is the Schrimpf's Field. So there were 3 main demographic periods for Frosttown. The original settlers to the area were German immigrants, and they settled there in the early 1800s. After that, the community was predominantly African American, and then after that, we had the third period, which was dominantly Hispanic residents, although there was still a number of African American residents there. So unfortunately, the community was destroyed, as I mentioned earlier, and there were several projects that mainly contributed to this. The biggest ones being in the 1950, the Elysian Street Viaduct project, and then the East Tex Freeway project, which is now US 59. By the 1955, we only had 2 houses remaining in Frosttown, and then the last home was eventually removed in 1999. So let's talk a little bit about the Schrimpf family, since that is the relevant family here. So Johann Wilhelm and Johann Ernst Schrimpf, not confusing at all, but they're both first names are both Johann. They were part of the wave of German immigrants that originally settled in Frosttown in 1839. And they established a butcher business together, which eventually grew into a larger meat market and slaughterhouse, big operation. Johann W. Schrimpf is the more relevant of the 2 brothers for our purposes today, because he purchased a lot of land in Houston, including the area east of Frosttown. He was also a very active community member. He was a founding member of the German Society of Texas in 1840, and he would also often be the person that would help new German immigrants get established and settled in the Houston area. And then in 1843, he was also one of the 2 aldermen for Houston's 2nd Ward. In 1851, he actually sold Schrimpf's field to a German immigrant, William Sedegast, when he arrived in Houston. However, the majority of the Sedegast family died in 1853 during a yellow fever epidemic. So Johann actually adopted the 2 surviving sons from that family, took them in and got them working in the meat market business. But consequently, even though the property no longer belonged to him, it was still under his management until the 2 brothers, the 2 Sedegast brothers, were grown and able to take possession of it. So the field was mostly used for grazing cattle for the Schrimpf's butcher business for a lot of the history of it. However, early maps do start to show a row of houses constructed along Rundle Street near the south end of Schrimpf's field in 1885, and up through the early 1900s, you see those houses start to expand from Rundle Street north towards the bayou. Housing was most likely for the workers of a lot of the industrial businesses that were popping up in the area, kind of creating, Frosttown kind of became a little bit of an island over in the middle of a bunch of businesses in the area. So during the 1930s to 1950s, during that predominantly Hispanic period, the community center shifted from Frosttown proper over into Schrimpf's Field, and the neighborhood took on the name of Barrio del Alacrán, or the Scorpion neighborhood. And the reason for that name was because Schrimpf Street kind of made a U that looked sort of like either a shrimp's tail or the stinger of a scorpion. This was still a very poor community though, with a lot of infrastructure not reaching it until the 1950s. And it was also known as one of the worst slums in Houston during this time. Due to this, the city tried to attempt to clean up the area and kind of make it a little bit nicer. They purchased Schrimpf's Field and demolished most of the homes, making way for the Clayton Homes public housing project in 1950. So the Houston Chronicle did a fantastic job of going out there and taking photos of the houses and the residents prior to the destruction for Clayton Homes. So they, on their archives, they have some photos dating from 1950 to 1952, which kind of give us a real cool snapshot of what this area looked like. So up around the left, we've got a happy family. They're moving out of their home. And then over on the right here, we have a nice view of what the wooden shotgun houses look like along the street here. Here's kind of some snapshots of where the residents go about their daily lives. And then over on the left here, we've got a nice view of one of the streets. You can see it's still dirt, but we do have electricity running through the neighborhood, and then a few homes have cars as well. And then over on the right here, these were some of the last homes to be bulldozed for the housing project development. So, as I mentioned before, the project that this was for, the Houston Highway Improvement Project, was a very large project. And so the surveys for the new right-of-way were kind of done piecemeal. And in early or late 2023, TxDOT finally acquired this parcel that used to contain the Clayton Homes projects and then demolished the homes, then making way for the archaeological survey to be conducted in the spring of 2024. A total of 21 trenches were excavated by the survey crew. And because of the time constraint on this project, as we often run into, unfortunately, in Texas, the hazmat team was coming behind the archaeology crew and digging their hazmat trenches once the archaeology kind of moved on. And down near the south end of the parcel, they actually ended up hitting something that looked to be cultural, and it was. It was a brookline cistern. It's marked down here with this black kind of black top right there. That was reported as feature 1, and the site was reported as Schrimpf's Alley site, or 41HR1276. Over on the left here, we have a view of the hazmat trench, and then you can see, unfortunately, it took out one of the walls of the cistern, but you can see the bricks around the diameter of the feature over here. And then over on the right, this was mostly archaeology crew had gotten down to the cultural deposits in this cistern. And you can see the still intact wall over here on this side. And here's an example of some of the artifacts that were reported during the survey. Lots and lots of glass bottles, most of them whole. And then some personal items too, like the base of this shoe over here on the bottom right. So after the site was reported, TxDOT recommended it as eligible for the NRHB and also recommended data recovery excavations to mitigate the adverse effects to the site. And there were two main objectives for the data recovery work. The first was to relocate and fully excavate the feature, the cistern, that had been reported, and then also to go ahead and search and see if we could identify any other features that were associated with the cistern. To achieve these objectives, there were kind of a two-pronged approach. The first was to pre-expose the feature, bisect the interior cultural fill, and then go ahead and excavate it completely. And then the second prong was mechanical scraping in a large area around the cistern in order to prospect for any other features that might be associated with it. Oh, here's photos of the feature 1 over here on the left. We have it re-exposed by the archaeology team and kind of dug down to the top of the cultural deposits. And then over on the right here, this is the interior cultural deposits bisected. You can kind of see it from the profile. I mean, it's kind of just jumbled in there. There weren't really any stratified deposits that we could see at this point. This is a feature fully excavated over here on the left, and then another view of it over here on the right. Here are some views of the mechanical scraping that was conducted to prospect for other features. As you can see, it's a very large area that was scraped. And then over here on the right, you have a nice view towards feature 1 with someone in it, kind of showing the scale of it. During the scraping, though, thankfully, we located another cistern. This one, as you can see, is much more intact than the last one, since the hazmat crew wasn't out there tearing things up. This is over on the right here, a better view of with one of the walls fully exposed. Over on the left here, that's another view of the exterior of it with a meter stick for scale. And then over on the right, some of the lining on the inside was chipped away, exposing the brick underneath. Over on the left there, that's the second feature fully excavated. And then over on the right, some examples of some of the artifacts discovered. Yeah, we'll actually get into that in a minute here. Yeah. So here is a view of the kind of southeast end of this parcel. We've got feature 1 over here, feature 2 kind of toward the southeast end, and this yellow block here, that's the area that was scraped with the backhoe. These dashed lines are abandoned utilities, and these dots are other modern services. All of those are most likely from the Clayton Homes housing project. Comparing the two features, they were very, very similar in construction. They're both composed of brick. They're plaster lined interior and exterior. Both similarly shaped. Feature 1 was slightly deeper than Feature 2, and Feature 2 was a little bit wider than Feature 1, but other than that, very similarly constructed. And they were composed of hand-molded bricks, which were of the dimensions there. They also have very similar amount of cultural fill at the bottom, and then they were filled in and truncated and filled in prior to the Clayton Homes project. So we had a similar amount of fill on top of them. They were also pretty homogeneous in the types of artifacts that we're finding in them, mostly 20th century artifacts from domestic setting. The only really noticeable difference was that Feature 2 had a layer of automobile tires on top of the other cultural fill, and most of those dated to the 1940s. Okay, so let's go ahead and get into archival research, and that will kind of illuminate the potential construction of the 40s. This map is the 1869 map of Houston once again, but now we have the approximate location of the cisterns marked down here in this area in red rectangle. As you can see, most of Schrimpf field is not developed at this time. Okay. This is the 1873 bird's eye view of Houston. It's just oriented north and Buffalo Bayou up here. The red oval shows the approximate location of the cisterns. Now at this time, there seems to be no construction in that area. These red numbers over here, though, are the brick-lined cisterns that were excavated in Frosttown by block. So there were a total of 10 cisterns discovered over in Frosttown. Looking at the Sanborn maps, which give us some of the earliest maps, off the top, this one dates to 1885, and on the bottom, 1890. The approximate, this red star here is the approximate location of Feature 1, and then the red dot of Feature 2. So based on this map, these buildings here along Barrio Street are labeled as tenements. And down here in 1890, that gives you kind of a better view of the location of the cisterns. These dwellings now are labeled as Negro dwellings, and then it's noted that it's vacant land to the north of that. So based on these two images, it seems pretty likely that we may have had a cistern every 2 houses to serve these here. Here is an 1891, another bird's eye map of Houston, and we've got the row of houses there along Harlow Street and the location of the cisterns marked with that. From here, moving along in time, on the top of an 1896 Sanborn map of the area. And the houses here are still labeled as Negro dwellings, but now, this is upside down, it's hard to read it. This says scattered Negro dwellings in this area up here. So we're starting to get a little bit of development north of Barrio Street. And then the bottom is the 1907 Sanborn map. This is the biggest difference that you can see here. First of all, we've got a row of houses along Barrio Street are just gone. We've got some streets in here that weren't there before, and we've got a lot of these large buildings down here along Barrio Street and some row houses to the north. These large buildings here are labeled as female boarding houses, which is code for brothels. So you can kind of see the downturn that this area is taking at this time. This map dates to 1913, and while the Cisterns brothers actually got possession of the property in 1880, this map is the first one that shows them as the landowners. So we've got Cisterns Realty marked there, and then Cisterns Realty Company marked here as well. And then the top map, this is dating to 1924. You can can see that the row houses are now filling in this gap, this area that used to be vacant in the last map. And we've got the approximate location of our cisterns marked up here. These bigger houses or buildings that were marked as communal boarding houses in the last map are now marked a deeper dwelling, and that's most likely because in 1917 the city of Houston began closing down a lot of the brothels in the area. And then one thing to note on this 1924 map is we now have water pipelines running all over this area. This bottom map dates between 1924 and 1951. Not a whole lot of change, but this large building close to Feature 2 has now been moved. So we kind of wanted to give an idea of the people that might have been using the cistern or throwing trash into it. And so we looked at the 1940 U.S. Census data. And based on the Sanborn maps, Feature 1 was located between 2004 and 2005 Rose Street, and Feature 2 was located in 2010 Rose Street. So we went ahead and pulled that data from the census data and get a kind of a look at the residents in this area. So 2004 Reynolds Street was occupied by Martinez family. The father was a Mexican immigrant who earned citizenship in 1936, and his wife was from Texas. He worked as a laborer for the steam railroad. Just next door to that, you'll have the Marshall family, Mr. Green and Mrs. Cecilia, from Texas and Louisiana. And Mr. Marshall worked as a laborer at the retail produce house. Just down the street, in 2010 Reynolds, we have the Orteco family, and some common things you can notice here. We've got predominantly Hispanic and African American residents. We've got pretty low levels of education. Their occupations are usually in the physical labor category. They have kind of similar incomes and rent as well. So, kind of summarizing this information and looking at what we know and what we would like to ask about or from this data. So the net recovery excavations moved a lot of dirt, as you can see, over 45,000 cubic feet of dirt. Just 2 features discovered and then thousands of artifacts, which Stantec, who did the data recovery, failed to mention that earlier, they have not started sorting through all the artifacts. So that's going to be a big job, but hopefully will be very illuminating when they do that. So here's kind of what we can conclude relatively confidently so far. The cisterns were most likely constructed between 1873 and 1885 to serve those houses along Reynolds Street. And they were most likely constructed for every 2 houses. They were most likely used as water containers to serve the area until the 1920s when the city water pipelines reached the neighborhood. And then from then, they most likely would have been used as trash receptacles. But there are still questions that need answering. There are a lot of questions we could ask, but here are some of them that I find probably the most interesting. First of all, who were occupying the homes when they were built between 1873 and 1885? I think it would be very interesting to pull the earlier census data and try to get a feel for, and then look at census data, between those 2 occupations, 1880 and 1940. Kind of see a little bit more of the story of the people that were living there and potentially using the cisterns. And then also looking at the artifacts, what we can tell about the residents between 1920 and 1950, when the cisterns were most likely stopped being used for water before they were filled for the this project. And then do we have any outlying artifacts that are much earlier that might have been checked down the well by somebody or a just kids running around? Is there anything that we can learn from the artifacts that might give us information about the earlier residents? And then one of the most interesting areas of research, I think, that would be worth pursuing is comparing these cisterns to the ones excavated in Crosstown. As I mentioned earlier, there were 10 similar cisterns excavated across town. Similar construction, similar time frame, and so I think it would be useful to compare the two and see if there are anything we can say, any conclusions we can draw from comparing those two data sets. Quick look at my resources, but that is pretty much it. Do we have any questions that I could answer for y'all this evening? Yes.
What was the material that they brought?
There's plaster. Yes.
Yeah, I'm going to reveal my ignorance about cisterns. Where does the water come from? How does it get into the cistern? How do neighbors manage if they're both sharing them? How long does the water stay good? How does the water stay sweet?
Those are a lot of questions.
Cisterns.
And I'm not super knowledgeable about this, but I can probably answer a little bit better. But to my knowledge, they mostly would have been collecting rainwater. We didn't see any sort of pumps or anything that would have been funneling water into or out of them. So unless they had like a cap on the top pumping it out, it was most likely just collecting rainwater. And then as far as like management and how long it's good for, I'm not really sure. Do you have any?
So one of the differences between Crosstown and these are truncated deeper. So when they came in and did the Clayton homes, they dug it out a little deeper and they put them below the shoulder line. So you're not seeing as much of it. At Crosstown, we actually found some of the intake pipes at the shoulder, and they would be either vitrified clay pipe, like the sewer pipe, or little brick columns that were squared off columns where it would come from a house, it would have a better system, come down, and you would tell the direction that the house was from the cistern. And so that would help us in a lot of cases. And it almost always corresponded perfectly with the maps. Where the house was, that was the direction and the lines were going. But the cisterns were in good wet times, you would never have a problem with not having enough water. In dry periods, you might run a little bit short. I don't know if you guys know Bill Martin, who works at the Historical Commission. Out of his place in the Hill Country, they lived for quite a few years on just cistern water. They had installed their own cisterns and had no other water supply. And they would go into conservation mode when it got really dry, but otherwise, wouldn't do that. And a cistern will usually supply a family with plenty of water, all the time. And as long as you don't let it get dirty inside and start getting growth going, then you're usually okay. And there's lots of accounts of people draining their cistern and scrubbing it out and cleaning it and having to go through that route. But otherwise, a cistern is just it's a maintenance kind of thing. You make sure you keep your gutters clean. And one thing that we know people did is they had filter boxes for cisterns. And the drain would come in and it would come into a larger box, and you could put charcoal in that box, and it would literally filter through the charcoal and take out all the impurities. So there's a lot of little tricks to it, to living with a cistern. But I never lived in a house that used a cistern, but I know my parents and grandparents were quite familiar with them.
We had one on farm.
Still in use?
Yeah.
Yeah. No.
Yeah, it was big.
Where?
Above ground.
Okay, above ground. So in gravity flow. Where did it come
No,
into the
no,
house?
rainwater.
Right, but I mean, from the cistern itself to get to the house.
Oh, it's right behind the house.
So it was just gravity flowed into the house in the kitchen?
Yeah.
Okay. Most of these would have had a pump inside, and one of the old hand pumps. The original, like a well, you might use just a bucket and full of it, but once you got a cistern, you were using some kind of hand pump. And an awful lot of cisterns, the pumps themselves, have a cistern after again.
Yes.
Well, what kind of septic systems do you have there?
I have no idea. What kind of septic systems? I'm not really sure. Yeah, we don't have a whole, potentially, yeah, we don't have a whole lot of information on the houses in this area.
If you have to know, there was some riverboats on those pictures, how navigable was Buffalo Bay?
Oh, it was.
I believe it was one of the main waterways in Houston, right?
Absolutely. It was the main port until 1914, when the modern Port of Houston was built. And one of the things that was going on is that the U.S. Army Corps of Engineer would widen and keep Buffalo Bayou clean of debris, because it was an important channel all the way up to what was called Allen's Landing at the foot of Main Street. And that is where all the boats came in, and these would be steamships. The very first steamship came up to that point in, it would have been early 1836, and that's when they established Houston with the Allen brothers, and the Frost brothers were establishing Frosttown at the exact same time. But that first trip took them several days to get from Galveston up to there, and it was just the bayou was choked with vegetation. But once they started clearing it out and making it clear some ship traffic, it became the main economic artery.
I kind of wonder why those streets that way around
Now I know.
How far?
Oh, the distance-wise, oh no, from all the way down to the mouth, the bayou, probably about 15 miles. Yeah, that's more, probably more than that, yeah. Good question.
Other questions? I thought I saw it. All right. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate you doing it. Thanks for doing that.